Hello, everybody. My name is Sue,
Hi, and I'm Alex.
and welcome to HopeWorks. This is a place where we're going to explore the science, the art, and the practice of a range of different tools and areas in the space of well-being and positive psychology. And we're going to do it in a way that hopefully brings it to life in very practical, small steps for us. And the reason that we're here, Alex and I, is because hopefully we've got decades of experience in this space and more importantly, lived experience. Would you agree, Alex?
Absolutely, yeah. So, personally, I've been in this space generally, if you talk about the kind of understanding of the human condition, since 1979. So, lots of lived experience.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to explore different topics, and Alex and I have decided that the first topics we're going to look at is hope. And we've called this Hope Works because we hope that it works, but we know that hope works, and it's also a key topic. So, Alex, to kick us off with our topic today, focusing on hope, how do you define it based on your understanding?
I think the first thing to say about hope, and I believe this will run through all of the topics that we talk about. So, is that in essence it's a skill set. So I think people sometimes misunderstand these broad concepts and they think that you're innately born as a hopeful person or not a hopeful person. So I'll get to the definition in a second or two, but I just wanted to say, right up front for people that, if you're not currently somebody who's experiencing a lot of hope, that doesn't mean we can't get there. And it's going to be clunky for you. So it's a bit like learning to drive. You're going to have to consciously think about it. I don't know if you can recall when you learned to drive, for it seems so long ago, but thinking about mirror signal, mirror maneuver, and learning to be hopeful is much the same.
Great.
So part of the definition is to say what it's not. So often people will confuse concepts like optimism with hope. And optimism at its heart is the belief that things will get better no matter what. So you don't actually have to take any action. You just believe, and are, living in the faith that things will change for you and they will improve. Hope carries with it that same belief, but that you need to take action, and that you can actually control the parts of the future that you face. Therefore, if you take the steps towards the destination you want to be in, then things will improve for you.
I love that, Alex. And if we look at the actual science of hope, to your point, sometimes it gets a little muddled out there in the world. But if we look at the science of
Mm.
hope, it has those two components of what is the envisioned future
Yeah.
that we're aiming for, and more importantly, am I taking responsible action towards that future?
Yeah.
And to your point, I want to come back to you said about control. We might not have control over the envisioned future, but talk to us a little bit more about that control of our actions or steps that we might be able to take.
Yeah, sure. So I think that, again, the first thing to say is that we're not talking about massive amounts of action. So we're not talking about taking huge dramatic steps. I've done that in my life. I migrated to Australia on a bit of a whim, and that was probably not the most sensible option to take, although it worked out fantastically well. What we're talking about is taking really, really small steps. So let's take the situation where somebody is not satisfied with where their physical health sits. And they're thinking, what can I do about it? What we're not talking about is saying, right, I'm going to commit to running a half marathon in 6 months. We're talking about exploring the options. That's your first step, is some action you could take that within the next 20 minutes. So you could Google search, what can I do? You can join a library and read a book. It's the very small steps that kind of become incremental on your journey. So when we're talking about action, we're always talking about small, manageable chunks of pieces of work for you.
Mm. So coming back to your experience, and you said, you sort of came to Australia in a whim, and I'm sure you had moments where hope wasn't there. You may have had moments where you felt hopeless.
Yeah.
Can you give us your sort of experience, whether it's that example or others, of where you have leveraged hope, and what's been the thing that's been able to sort of trigger you into a more hopeful way of thinking and being?
Yeah, certainly. So I think the migration to Australia is a great example because there were many moments of kind of peaks and troughs of a hope and no hope. So when I was interviewed and I was shown a map of Australia and they said pick somewhere to go and I had absolutely no idea. So they picked for me and they said, "Will you go to the Latrobe Valley in Victoria?" And I said yes. And I thought that was it. I thought it's a done deal. A year later, before we actually we received a visa to allow us to migrate to Australia. And in terms of a hopeless moment, I can remember being on holiday in Tunisia and talking to my wife and saying, "Well, what if it doesn't come off? What are we going to do?" And in that moment, there was that moment of feeling no control over what was happening. And again, this sounds overly dramatic, but I said, well, I will never visit Australia. If they don't allow us to migrate there, I'm never going on holiday. Um, but once I got over that emotional reaction, we started to talk about what can we do in the current situation. What are some small steps we can take ready for the migration to Australia? And that's what we started to do. We started to explore little places we would like to visit. So we made the commitment that if we got to Australia, we would travel down the Great Ocean Road in Victoria. I wanted to visit 90 Mile Beach. So we started to make a list of things that we would actually take. And I think that sense of there's action that I can take and starting to prepare for it, it generated the hope
Yeah.
that things would improve.
It's a really good example, and actually for me, I applied to come to Australia on a visa, and I got turned down. And I remember being in the UK and getting that call basically that says, "No, you've been rejected," and bursting into tears and feeling absolutely useless and
Yeah,
hopeless, etc. And then to your point, it was okay once you get past that emotional bit, which you mentioned
yeah.
then able to go, okay, what next? Well, I'm going to reapply. I'm going to look at different visa classifications, etc. So I wonder if there's something in us there's part of being able to flip our thinking a little bit, but then even those little steps of what can I do next? And I think that's the bit that often people miss that the science actually tells us is important, that once we start taking those steps, that hope seems to come back. And I've heard that in your story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. And I think again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's critical that people realize we're talking about very, very small steps. That I haven't seen a lot of evidence that the hope returns if people make too big a leap in terms of what they believe they should do. And in fact, I think it reinforces the hopelessness because it becomes too much of a challenge
Yes.
for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. S-
So thinking about that then, because I think that's a really interesting one, and it leads us back to the two components of hope, if I may. So one, we said it's this envisioned future, and two is the steps. What about if the envisioned future is too big and we feel like we can't even imagine what it's going to be?
Yeah, so that leads me to some work I've done with some people during my work in life, and I often ask them to not project too far into the future. So sometimes we kind of get carried away with these fanciful, grand images of what the future can look like. But let's talk about tomorrow. Let's talk about what tomorrow could look like if we just made some very, very minor changes in our life.
Mm.
So bringing it closer to the now, I think, is part of all of this. If you want to go big picture and you want to go to a great vision, a tool that I use very regularly with people is to get them to literally create an image. And you can build on that image as time moves on. So I worked with a woman in the United States, and she described herself as being stuck. And so we got to create a picture of what unstuck would look like. And as time moved on, we just added more and more elements.
Yeah. I love that. It's making me think. I've just made a note for myself that I might need to think about creating an image. Because
Excellent.
sometimes you can't necessarily, I mean, some people, to your point, some people might be able to go, well, in 10 years' time, this is what I want.
Yeah.
But often they can't. So I love that idea of building what does it feel like? And I know that resonates for me because I find I can't necessarily think about 10 years from now, but I can think about who I want to be and how I want to live. And
Yeah.
maybe that's easier to make steps when, or to take steps when people have a feeling of what it's going to be like.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on a very key thing here. So it's about the life and the feeling in that life. So I remember walking on the beach with my youngest son, and he was saying he couldn't think of a career pathway he wanted, and people had said to him, so he had just finished doing his degree in philosophy, and people had said, well, you need to choose now a career that you'll commit to for the rest of your life. Like, wow. So we walked on the beach actually in Australia, and I said to him, look, it's not about that. Decide what kind of life you want, and then you can work out what the work would support the life. So what do you want to feel in your life? And he talked about adventure, and he went on to live in multiple countries around the world, traveled on solo around the world on a motorbike, and eventually here we are decades later, and he's now settled down and found the career he wants, but he's been living the life that he wanted.
So let me come back to that because if you look at what the research tells us around that envisioned future, it often tells us that even if you can't envisage the future and you're not quite sure what it looks like, that can you look at experiences either now or in the past where you have experienced those before? Because somebody might say, well, I don't know what it's like to feel well, or I don't know what it's like to feel fit and healthy, or I don't know what it's like to have the job of my dreams, or whatever it happens to be. But if you've had moments in your past, that you can recognize what does it feel like and how do you get more of that, how has that helped you perhaps then project into the future of what you hope for?
Yeah, so sorry, this is going to be a kind of bit of a weird tangent, but for me, it kind of explains it all, really. I think that we misunderstand the when we actually say to people about moving into a outside of your space of comfort is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
And I think that that is the wrong way to view moving forward, because I don't actually believe that that's what happens. I don't think that people are moving outside of a space of comfort. They're moving outside of a space of familiarity.
Hmm.
And familiarity is the key here. So taking the example you've just given, going back to something that's similar to where I want to be in terms of an experience. It doesn't have to be identical. So with my plan to migrate to Australia. Well, I had moved before internally within the UK. I'd moved from the northeast of England to Cambridge and had no idea what Cambridge was like. I then moved back to the northeast of England. So there were multiple examples that I could draw on and say, how did I get through this before? And what can I learn from those? Then on top of that, our brain is not as clever as most of us make out to be. I've heard people say, the brain is the most complex things in the universe. Well, we don't actually know that. But what we do know is we can trick it. And the brain doesn't know the difference between a made-up experience and a real experience. So if you really, really get stuck, you can read somebody else's story
Mm.
and you can imagine yourself in that story. And the brain will not know the difference. So you'll get the same emotional response. So that would be something I would strongly recommend to people is if you're stuck, always imagine what it would be like if you were there.
Yeah, and I love that. And I want to come back to that because I think that's a really important point that the science tells us, but often doesn't get translated into the everyday of finding those moments. And to your point, it could be a similar moment or an imaginary moment or something. So if you had to think about moments that bring you joy, that you want to get more of, that perhaps give you hope for the future, what sort of moments do you reflect on?
Yeah, often it actually is associated with challenge. Um, so I remember when I was a lot younger and fitter than I am now, running multiple half marathons. And I was running a half marathon myself and my wife together, and there was about half a kilometer to go, and we were both really struggling, and we got stuck in that cycle of actually saying to each other, "This is hard. I don't know if I can make it to the end." And some random person who was just standing at the side of the street shouted out, "Be proud, you half marathoners." And the energy that came from that was phenomenal.
Mm.
Um,
I was going to say, can I just pick up on that? What did
yeah.
you notice when they said that? Because they could have been talking to anybody. So how did you internalize that enough to keep you going?
Yeah, that's a really good point because I don't think they kind of were picking us out. There were so many other people there, but it was that moment of, yeah, you're right. We are. That gave us a new identity, and it mainly changed our conversation. It changed the words we were sharing with each other, and we were both saying, yeah, yes, we can do this.
Yeah.
And now, seriously, I would think that's probably 15 years ago now, but we still talk about that moment when that person touched our lives, whoever that human being was. And I think there are moments where we need each other.
Yeah.
And you're going to need on this journey of finding hope and moving forward, you're going to need people who are going to be your cheerleaders,
Mm.
people who are going to say, yes, you can do it. And remember when you did X, Y, and Z.
Yes, and I think that's a key thing that the Science of Hope tells us is remembering those things of when you did so that you can get more of it. So if we sort of bring this into a real practical element of what people can do, I know I've had my moments of feeling hopeless and then sort of having to flip it around.
Mm.
We've talked about sort of thinking about the past and those sorts of things and try and remembering those good things, those wonderful things. What other really practical ways have you seen of bringing hope to life in a day-to-day basis?
I think again the first one is to recognize that it is a skill set
Yeah.
and that you've learned skills before. No matter who you are, you've learned things from when you were a toddler right through to where you are in life now. And on that journey, you've also stumbled.
Yeah.
Uh, so if you think about if you're a mom, if you're a father, or presumably anybody listening to this is once was a child, when you started to walk, and you got up and you took your first few steps and you fell over, you didn't think, oh, that's it, I'm no good at this, I give up. You just kept going. So inside you still is that toddler. Inside you is that person that says, yes, I can do this no matter what.
And can I
So
just interrupt there, Alex,
yeah,
if I may? Because I love that analogy. I often use
yeah,
that analogy myself, but also while you're talking, I'm thinking as the parent or the
oh,
caregiver of that child that's just fallen down, that toddler that's fallen down, they're not sitting there watching, going, "Oh, I hope they get up again," or "I hope they
yeah,
walk one day."
yes,
They're actually encouraging them and saying, "Come on, you've still
exactly.
got a fraction of a second, keep going."
Yeah,
So there's that
exactly.
element too. I love that. Sorry, I had to interrupt there because
No, that's good. That's yeah,
two
absolutely right.
components of that we need to consider. I love it.
Yeah. So going back to what I said earlier, I have a real strong belief in the power of imagery. And I think creating an image of the better future. So a couple of times in this conversation, you've used the word envision, and and encapsulated in that is vision. And I think this is not talking about vision boards that people often talk about. It's just creating a picture of what it would look like if you were successful on your journey and building on that picture. So whether you want to draw a picture, you want to use collage, you want to create something on your computer, and then each time you take a step, you add to that picture. So it becomes bigger and bigger and reinforces to you the steps you're taking. I worked with one person where she said, Alex, I can see it, but I can't find the words. And what she did was just drew a picture of explosions of color. And we talked about, well, which piece of color do you want to work on next? Let's work on that piece today and this piece tomorrow. Uh, Chunking it down is always massively important here. So if you think about what can I achieve within the next 20, 25 minutes, and whatever you come up with, make it even smaller.
Yeah.
Don't stretch yourself too much.
I like that because, again, sometimes people set these really big envisioned future of I'm going to be a millionaire and then I'll be happy, and I'm going to do this and then
Yeah,
I'll be happy. But actually,
yeah,
to your point of chunking it down and saying, well, when have you been happy before? What were you doing? And
yeah,
how do you get more of that might be a better option. And you still might
yeah,
get to the big one,
absolutely.
but it's
Yeah.
less overwhelming, I think.
It is, and you know, it's the root of all success is taking very gradual, small steps, pausing, saying, "Where am I now?" before you take your next step, and so on. So building in those moments of pause and reflection, and remembering how far you've come is also a critical part of the picture of becoming a more hopeful human being.
I love it. I love it. Well, as we bring this to a close, then, so our challenge to everybody listening is to take that science of hope. And yes, we've got our envisioned future that might come from little moments of what do we want to do more of. We might get them to envision the future by doing something with imagery of some sort, whether we're creative or not is not the point, but some sort of imagery if we can't get the words. But most importantly, what I'm hearing along the way and what this research tells us is little steps, little small things every day that are going to allow us to practice that skill that you're talking about. The more we practice these tiny little skills, the more hopeful we will get for a potentially more wonderful future.
Absolutely, and even in the moments where you think I can't do this, and you start to really struggle, then action becomes a critical part of that, and that's where we're going to go to in our next episode, is the science of agency slash action. So, how can you become orientated towards taking some kind of steps towards your envisaged future?
I love it. We will see you all next time for our next session around agency. Thank you, Alex, for your wisdom. It's always a pleasure to play together.
Thanks, Sue.
Bye, everyone.